From the Columbia University Language Resource Center, this is Said and Done, the podcast about languages and the people who speak them. This is Said and Done. I'm Chris Kaiser, and joining me today is Simon Zuberek, educational technologist at the Columbia University Language Resource Center. In this conversation, Simon talks about growing up speaking both Polish and English, as well as learning several other languages along the way. We then explore different facets of the experience of bilingualism, in particular how certain situations cause him to choose one language over the other, and how trying to use the other language when it's not the right situation for it can sometimes cause problems. Here's my conversation with Simon Zuberek. Simon Zuberek, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the different languages that you speak and how you've come to speak them, and then what you do with those languages. So could you talk a little bit about the languages that you know and the basic outline of how you know them or where you learned them?
Absolutely. So it all started in Poland.
As many things do.
And as many things do. Where I was born and where I started acquiring language, which was Polish, of course. But then there came the first twist, which happened when I was 2.5. And at that point, I came to the United States for the first time. So me and my parents spent here, I think, either a year or 6 months. I mean, obviously, I don't remember at this point. And then we came back to Poland, where I continued acquiring the Polish language, having already spent part of what we call in the business a formative period in the United States. So by that time, I have been exposed significantly to both Polish and English. And as it so happens, in Europe, English is a required second language since the very beginning of your formal education, so grade 1 in elementary school. So in that sense, that I continued with it, and while at the same time, of course, functioning in Polish on a day-to-day basis. And here comes another twist, because whereas my elementary and middle school years were spent in Poland, my high school years were spent in the United States. I came back to America at the beginning of what traditionally is considered high school age, and having already been fluent in English and in Polish, I was asked to select a language to study in high school. So I started studying German in high school as a teenager. I became pretty good at it. I really liked it. It made all the sense in the world to me, perhaps due to the fact that I was already bilingual at that time. It was a third language in my assortment. And I liked it so much that I wanted to continue to study it. So I thought that I would continue in college, which is what I did. I enrolled in a major in Germanic studies. While in college, I became really interested in the ancient civilizations, ancient Greece and Rome, and I enrolled in Latin. In grad school, I continued with German, and since I, at that time, lived in Chicago, I had a lot of Russian-speaking friends. I thought it would be nice to learn Russian, especially with my Polish background already. So to kind of sum everything up, it all started with Polish, then English, then German, Latin, and Russian.
Gotcha. Wow, that's a lot. So I'm very fascinated with the situation where a person has two languages that they learn early on in their lives. And I know there's a lot of people in this situation, but I'm not one of them. I learned Italian later on. I started studying when I was 19. So I'm really curious to just explore the relationship between Polish and English in your own mind, how you feel about each of these, how you use each of these, the role that these languages have in your life. And then we can talk about the other languages that you studied later on. but I want to just kind of focus in on the two languages that you learned
Sure.
as a young person
Yes, yes.
growing up. So I guess my first question is if I ask you what is your native language, how would you answer that question?
I would say that my native language is still Polish. My dominant language at this point is English.
When you go through, say, for example, a week, how much Polish do you use? How much English do you use? And in what context do you use them?
Well, last week I used quite a bit of Polish because my mom was visiting from Poland, so
Okay. Yeah.
so it was pretty much Polish all the way.
Okay.
However, that at least in part answers this question because I do use Polish largely in the context of interacting with my family members.
Okay.
Half of my family on my mother's side lives in the United States. The part of family on my dad's side lives in Poland. I speak with all of them in Polish. I'm very close to my brothers who live in the United States and then in Poland as well. So all those interactions are in Polish, whether orally or through texting.
Right.
And that would be the language that I associate with my childhood, that I associate with, being an early teenager. It is the language that brings me comfort. I like to read books in that language because, again, I find myself at home
Sure.
with it. I sometimes struggle when trying to express myself in Polish, especially just trying to explain to my parents what I do for a living, what I study. But I don't know. I'm sure that's not just limited to Polish.
It's always hard to talk to your parents from time to time.
Yeah. So I do I am aware and I do recognize that there are certain gaps that are easier for me to navigate and to address in English, probably simply because I lack formal education in Polish. I went through university here, and then that sort of points at English, right, which is the dominant language in which I function day to day. And that is the language in which I received advanced education. I'm familiar with terminology. I can express myself fully and somewhat competently. And that is, this is the language of work, and that is also the language of day-to-day, I guess, challenges that I run into. So it doesn't come to me with this sense of safety and comfort.
Right. Oh, okay. So because as you move through your day, your professional life, problems present
Exactly.
themselves, and you're like, here's another problem to solve, and I have to use English to solve this problem.
Right. And not just professional life, but also everything that sort of, surrounds it. So also academic life, banking, taxes, things like that, right? That are not always pleasant experiences, which have, to me, happened almost exclusively in English, and I've never experienced that in Polish.
This is fascinating to me because you have associated different feelings and affects and just a sense with how do you use this language and what to use it for. And so for English, it seems like it's issues that you need to take care of. But with Polish, it's like your family, feeling good with them, enjoying spending time with them.
Also, the food of my childhood, the sense of familiarity, Christmas, these kinds of things.
Yeah. So when you think about these two languages that you have, do you feel at all that there's ever a lack in one language? In which ways do you feel like you might be lacking in Polish? In which ways do you feel like you might be lacking in English, if you feel that at all?
Yeah. So I can illustrate with a story or with a situation.
Sure.
Where I go to Poland frequently to visit my family, and sometimes I would have to do adult things,
Which you don't typically do in Polish.
which I had never been like. I don't typically do them in Polish. I know how to address them in English. I know how to go about them in English. How to accomplish them. In Polish, those are not novel experiences for me. There's the novelty, there's the language novelty, but what is really interesting is how I feel about them.
Okay.
So, for instance, sometimes as a person who is privileged with a dual nationality, I sometimes need to go and take care of updating my passport, let's say, right? And there's a procedure that you follow. There are documents that you have to complete, but then you have to go to an office and talk to people who are there and explain what it is that you want to do and how you want to proceed and what it is you're trying to accomplish. Whereas I know exactly how to behave in these situations. Whenever I am put in these circumstances, I feel like a child.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I feel completely out of place. And at some deep subconscious level, I feel like I should not be doing this, that this is not me. I mean, it's going to sound ridiculous, but this is my dad or my mom should be taking care of this. Why am I
Right.
here?
Yeah.
Right.
Huh. Yeah.
Even though I'm a functioning grown adult who is expected to be taking care of these things. And it's not to say that I run back home whenever I need to confront these situations. I do confront them and I manage to accomplish what I need to accomplish, but that sense is there and it is pronounced enough for me to be aware of it. And then conversely, whenever I function in English, I always feel like an adult. Like that part of the association with child things is just not there.
Yeah.
For me.
Mm-hmm. So when you are just moving through your day, we all have or I guess most of us have a little internal monologue in our minds. You're thinking, oh, I'm hungry right now, or whatever. So for you, in which language do you think, or does it change, or is it a combination?
That is largely dependent on the language that I am functioning in at that time. So when going back to last week when my mom was visiting, I was at home and I was just fully in Polish mode, right? I thought in Polish. My internal monologue or dialogue.
I guess it depends on how many people you've got in there.
That was all in Polish. Now that she's gone and no longer there, and the majority of my day-to-day interactions are in English, the default language is English. When I studied abroad in Vienna, Austria, that discourse became German. And I knew that because I started dreaming in German, which is not just for me, but for a lot of people who speak multiple languages, kind of an indication that this is your the language of your thoughts.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. As a personal side note, I have dreamed in Italian, but when I have Italian dreams, it's always me speaking Italian very badly, and Italians getting mad at me for being so bad at Italian. But the Italian that they speak is perfect in my dream.
Yeah, I don't pay as much attention to my interlocutors as in my dreams.
So, what about dreaming when you're here? Do you dream in Polish or in English?
You mean at work?
No, when you're
in America, I dream in English.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You mentioned that you have brothers. You have two brothers, right? And one lives in Poland and one lives in the United States.
Yes.
And you speak with both of them in Polish.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice any kind of difference in the Polish that you speak with one brother versus the other? Do you ever speak in English with the one brother who lives in the United States?
No, I never speak exclusively in English with either of them, and that is by choice, and I feel very strongly about that. Sometimes with the brother who lives here, I would interject individual words and terms just simply because I would not be able to think of a Polish word at a time, or I may not know it.
Right.
And we would do it that way. With my little brother, I really like talking to him because he uses colloquial speech and slang, which is perhaps the layer of the language that is most rapidly advancing and evolving. Right. And it's always just a lot of fun to hear new ways of saying old things and new terms and phrases, and and I learned from him and through him, and then I sometimes throw things back at him, which is absent from, of course, when I talk to my other brother who lives here.
Right. So your brother who lives here, would you say that his Polish is more static and not evolving in the same way that your brother who lives in Poland
Yeah,
is?
absolutely.
And maybe it has become more pronounced over time.
Yeah, I mean, both me and my brother who live here, we stopped functioning in Polish when we were teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Neither one of us received formal education at higher level in Polish. Like, we just don't function in that environment. Whereas our youngest brother does.
Yeah.
And he is in college at the moment, and he's fully immersed in the culture, and it's great because you are that lets you stay connected,
right,
to the language as it exists, as it functions, as it lives, and like I said, it's just a lot of fun.
A little earlier, you mentioned that you and your brother have decided not to speak English with each other, and you said you feel very strongly that you not do this. Can you talk a little bit about that decision? How you decided to do that and how you enforce it?
Yeah, it wasn't as much of a decision as just a sheer inertia of us having always communicated in Polish, and as we have been progressing through the U.S. educational system and acquiring vocabulary and structures, there has been a temptation for both of us to start weaving those into our conversations, because that is something that you are surrounded with, you live it, you breathe it, you want to use it, but at the same time we don't really get many opportunities to speak our first languages. And even though English may be our dominant language at the moment, it is still good to maintain this connection and to nurture Polish. So it wasn't a decision, really. It was sort of something that, a trend, I would say, that just emerged naturally.
So it emerged naturally. However, one might say that not switching over to English at a certain point may be a kind of decision. At any moment you could do that. So
right.
Why don't you? What prevents you from doing that?
Well, there are certain times when we do resort to English. There's vocabulary, there are words that we don't know the equivalents of in Polish, right? So that sort of necessitates code switching. But, aside from that, I think at this point, since we were both in our 30s, I think it'd just be weird to suddenly, switch to English. I mean...
So it would just feel strange to do.
Yeah, it'd be very bizarre. There are times when we do. Both our partners are English speakers, and speaking Polish in front of them is exclusive.
Right.
So that there are situations when usually social situations, but when it's just us, then the communication happens in Polish. And also our youngest brother is there. It's, he's in Poland as we chatted, and, his language is Polish as well. So, if we were to suddenly switch into English, it would be even more bizarre for him.
Right. Yeah.
Whenever he's included. So I think that would be a very banal reason for just sticking to the first language.
Still, I think it's really interesting to see how it plays out, how the dynamics play out. You might consider it banal, but for me, it's very interesting to just think about how this all works. So if I were having a conversation with you and your brother who lives here in the U.S., and we were all three talking, and then I walked away, I had to go. Would you immediately be switching back to Polish?
Probably.
Would there be some kind of signal to do that, or would just the next thing you say would be in Polish?
Usually I am the initiator of whatever switch may happen, or at least so it seems to me. So yeah, if you were involved in the conversation and you were to permanently leave, then yeah, we would almost instantly switch to Polish, because again, it is very awkward not to.
Right.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I gotcha. So some people have told me that when I speak Italian, it's not just like the the Italian version of me. There's sound sort of different. They seem kind of different. So I'm just kind of curious to hear how you sound in Polish. So I was wondering, is there like a aphorism or a saying that you like, just so I can hear you speak Polish and just kind of get a sense of what it sounds like?
There are a number, but one comes to mind now that we sit in the office.
Okay.
Is it translates to English as "not my monkeys, not my circus," which in Polish sounds "nie moje małpy, nie mój cyrk."
Okay, I like it. Nice. And I think that's a good there's a good piece of wisdom behind that too.
More than one, yes.
Yeah, it's funny because I never hear you speak Polish, so it's funny to hear you do it. Just to kind of explore all facets that I can think of on this topic, how do you sort of think of yourself as a bilingual in terms of your identity? To what extent is that part of your identity? Is it something that you think about, or is it just not something that's salient to you?
The way that I approach identity is as something that is shaped in relation to something else. And, we can get into a conversation, a debate, whether, an identity can exist in a vacuum. My experience, it cannot. So my identity is a bilingual, which I think is one of the many identities that I have. Just like you, Chris, probably also have many identities.
I've got a couple.
Right. So yeah, it's sort of it's a function of the environment.
Okay.
So for instance, when I was a student in Vienna, Austria, where I spent a year abroad, my identity over there was of an American who's functioning in German-speaking space.
What about the Polish part when you were there?
That part was largely just not on the map for people, and if it was, it would only be recognized by other Poles. For them, my identity was that of a Polish person who studies at American university and somehow is doing his semester abroad in Austria. But that's for them. For me, it was interesting because it sort of started out as an American of Polish descent studying abroad, and then as I was moving through that year, I was progressively finding points of affinity with the culture there. And I don't mean explicitly, the Austrian culture, but sort of the general sensibility of the kind of Central European space.
Yeah,
Mhm.
gotcha.
Here, I perceive myself as an American who has a background and who exists in this melting pot. I think, again, part of that perception may have to do with us just living in New York City, right, which is a big cosmopolitan space where things constantly move and shift and mix and evolve. In Poland, I'm Polish.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. When I speak Polish, I don't speak with an accent. It may sometimes take me a while to find the right word for what I want to say, how I want to express myself. But other than that, I don't think that people on the street would be able to tell that I am not a functioning, fully aware Polish adult.
I'm sure there are plenty of people in Poland who struggle at the bank or at the embassy too,
Right, yeah. Although, I mean, we were visiting a couple months ago for Christmas, and there was an incident where, I mean, not an incident really, I had to, fill up a car at the gas station, and I was asked by my father to grab a special type of invoice so that my dad could write it off
yeah.
his taxes
Yeah.
at the end of the year. And there's a certain way to ask for the document. There's a certain sequence of events that need to take place before you request the document and after you request the document, right?
There's
I
a
was
whole
only-
ritual.
Right, right. I mean, there's a procedure, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you do this, you then pay, you then ask for this, you provide this number, which is common sense for my dad. It's common sense for the clerk. It is probably even more common sense for the clerk when he sees me approach him and tell him that is what I would like to do, only to fail at doing it, right?
Okay.
Even though everything else sort of would indicate that it was just like a routine situation.
So he would never. So he might expect
He
a
was
person.
stumped.
So like a person like me who speaks no Polish or maybe learns 30 words in Polish would try to ask for an invoice. He'd say, "Okay, this is a guy from somewhere else. He has no clue.
Yeah.
I'll help him." But he
Right.
sees you. He thinks 100% Polish. What's going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, what is happening here?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
So really, what you're saying is, when I ask you about your linguistic identity, your response is that it's contingent on the situation.
Right. A lot of times it is.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that makes sense. So Simon Zuberek, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to be asking you back on the podcast. There's much more that we could talk about. You're right down the hall, so I'll be
Yeah.
knocking on your door at some point. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone, for listening.